My name is Caleb Thompson. I'm 67 years old, and for 40 of those years, I built cars with my bare hands. I thought I was building a legacy, a foundation for my family. But that night, as my own daughter screamed at me to get out of the very house I'd paid for with a lifetime of sweat, I realized a foundation is worthless if the people living on it have no soul. She and her husband celebrated, thinking they'd finally cast off their embarrassing blue-collar old man. They had no idea that I wasn't just walking away. I was walking towards a phone call that would trigger a plan I'd set in motion 25 years ago. A plan that would teach them a lesson about foundation's legacy and the true price of the roof over their heads. Before I continue, I'd love to know where you're listening to my story from. Let me know in the comments below, and please hit that like and subscribe button if you believe that respect is earned, not inherited. I stood on the threshold of my own living room, a ghost at a party I hadn't been invited to. The air, once filled with the scent of my late wife Ruby's cooking, was now thick with expensive perfume and the sharp tang of wine. A soft, pretentious jazz tune snaked through the room, a sound so alien in this house it felt like an intruder. This was my home, the one I'd bought after years of overtime on the Ford assembly line, the one where every floorboard held a memory. Now it was a stage for strangers. Well-dressed, pale-faced strangers, holding tiny plates of food, talking about stock portfolios and vacations in places I couldn't even pronounce. My eyes scanned the room, searching for an anchor, something familiar in the sea of change. But everything was gone. The worn, comfortable armchairs where Ruby and I used to read on Sunday evenings had been replaced by sleek, angular sofas that looked like they were designed to punish you for relaxing. The warm oak coffee table I'd built myself was gone, replaced by a slab of glass and chrome. It was all so cold, so impersonal. It wasn't a home anymore. It was a showroom. And then I saw it. The empty wall. For 30 years, that spot had held our wedding photograph. A simple black and white picture of me and Ruby Young smiling our whole lives ahead of us. It was gone. In its place hung a large abstract painting, a chaotic mess of blue and gold streaks that my son-in-law Kevin had probably called an investment. A sharp pain lanced through my chest. "That's the heart of the home, baby," Ruby had whispered to me the day we hung that picture. "So we never forget where we started." They hadn't just forgotten. They'd deliberately erased it. Kevin's voice cut through the noise. He glided towards me, a glass of red wine swirling in his hand, his blazer fitting him in a way that screamed money. "I wasn't expecting you. Chantel mentioned you weren't feeling well." The lie rolled off his tongue so smoothly, a practiced performance. He thought I was a simple old man, easy to fool, easy to manage. I met his gaze, my face unreadable. I wasn't feeling well, that much was true. But it was a sickness of the soul, a kind he would never understand. I came for my toolbox. I said, my voice steady and low, a voice accustomed to being heard over the roar of machinery. "It's in the garage." A flicker of annoyance crossed his face before he masked it with a patronizing smile. "A toolbox. Good Lord, Caleb, are you still tinkering with that stuff? This is the age of the $500 plumber." He chuckled, a self-satisfied sound. Across the room, my daughter Chantel saw me. The socialite smile on her face froze, then melted into a mask of pure mortification. She moved towards me quickly, her heels clicking angrily on the hardwood floor she didn't pay for. "Dad," she hissed, her voice a low, urgent whisper. "What are you doing here?" She grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging into my sleeve, and pulled me towards the kitchen, away from the prying eyes of her important guests. The kitchen was just as alien. The sturdy oak table where we'd shared 1,000 family meals was gone, replaced by a giant, sterile island of white marble. "You know, this is an important networking event for Kevin." She continued, her voice trembling with barely concealed rage. Her eyes raked over me, from my clean but worn work boots to my denim jacket. "You can't show up dressed like that. What will people think? They'll think we don't take care of you. They won't think anything because they don't know who I am," I replied calmly. "I just came for my tools. Isaiah's water heater is broken." Isaiah was my best friend. We'd stood side by side on the line at the River Rouge plant for 35 years. The mention of a broken water heater of a blue-collar friend in need seemed to push Chantel over the edge. It was everything she was trying to escape. "You're still hanging around with those people, Dad, I told you. You're retired. You should be playing golf, joining a book club. You don't have to live like a factory worker anymore." Those people, I repeated the words, tasting like ash in my mouth, are the ones who helped us get this house in the first place, Chantel. Isaiah lent me the down payment when the bank turned us away. Her face hardened. That was a different time. We're in a different place now. Kevin and I are upgrading this house, Dad. We're finally making it worth something. The phrase making it worth something hit me like a physical blow, as if the years of laughter, tears, and love that had filled these walls meant nothing, as if Ruby's memory meant nothing. I saw their plan with perfect clarity then. This wasn't an upgrade, it was an erasure. They were systematically stripping away every trace of the life Ruby and I had built, replacing it with a hollow, stylish facade that suited their ambitions. They weren't just renovating a house, they were trying to renovate their past, and I was the last stubborn fixture they needed to remove. This house is already worth something, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. It's worth every late night I spent on the line, every meal your mother cooked in this kitchen, every scraped knee I patched up on those back steps. Oh, please don't be so dramatic, she scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. It's just a house. It's a financial asset, an underperforming one at that. We're trying to build a future, a real legacy, not cling to some sentimental working-class fantasy. That was it. The final brutal dismissal of my entire life's work. My legacy wasn't in brick and mortar, but in the values I tried to instill in her. Values she was now calling a fantasy. A deep, cold calm settled over me, the kind of calm that comes before the storm. I looked past her at the cold marble and stainless steel that had replaced the warmth of our family kitchen. I thought of Ruby, of her kindness, her strength, her fierce love for this home. I knew what she would have said. I knew what I had to do. I drew a breath and spoke the words that would ignite the fire. Your mother wouldn't have liked this. Chantel's face went from angry to white-hot rage. It was as if I had slapped her. Don't you dare! She seethed, her finger jabbing the air an inch from my face. Don't you dare bring her into this. Mom would have wanted this for me. She would have wanted me to have a beautiful life, not be stuck in the past like you and your embarrassing stories about factory unions and fixing cars. You're the one holding us back. You are an anchor dragging us down with your poverty mindset. Kevin appeared at her side, placing a hand on her shoulder in a show of solidarity. He looked at me with a smug, triumphant expression. Listen, Caleb, he said, his tone dripping with condescension. Maybe it's time you found a place, more suited to your lifestyle. A small apartment, perhaps. We'd even help you with the first month's rent. The offer was the final insult. They weren't just pushing me out. They were trying to buy my dignity for the price of a month's rent. I looked at my daughter, her face twisted with a resentment I no longer recognized, and at her husband, who looked at me like I was a piece of trash to be disposed of. The love I had for her was still there, buried deep, but it was overshadowed by a profound, soul-crushing disappointment, and in that moment she sealed her fate. She took a deep breath, her chest puffing out, and screamed the words that would cost her everything. Get out! Get out of my house! If you're not gone in 1 minute, I'm calling the cops. I didn't say a word. There was nothing left to say. The battle lines had been drawn. I held her gaze for a long moment, letting her see the stillness in my eyes. It wasn't the look of a defeated old man. It was the look of a man who had just made a decision. A terrible, necessary decision. Then, without another glance, I turned my back on my daughter and her husband, on the cold, strange house that was no longer my home. I walked out the front door, the sound of their shocked silence following me into the cool evening air. They thought they had won. They thought the fight was over. The truth was, it had just begun. The drive to Isaiah's apartment was a blur. The pristine, manicured lawns of my neighborhood slowly gave way to the gritty, honest streets of the Detroit I knew. Streets where people worked hard, looked out for each other, and didn't have time for abstract art or networking parties. I parked my old but reliable Ford pickup truck, the same model I'd helped build for 20 years, and walked up the 3 flights of stairs to his place. The door was unlocked, as it always was for me. Isaiah's apartment was the polar opposite of the house I had just left. It was small, but it was warm, filled with the comforting scent of brewing coffee and old paperbacks. A worn-out armchair was molded perfectly to the shape of its owner, and the walls were covered with photographs of his children and grandchildren, a testament to a life of love, not of assets. There were no marble islands here, just a sturdy wooden table with a few scratches that told stories. I didn't feel grief, not yet. The shock had numbed me, replaced all emotion with a cold, clear focus. I was a man on a mission now. I knew exactly what I needed to do because in the darkest part of my heart, I had been preparing for this day for a very long time. I walked past Isaiah, who was sitting at the table reading the paper, and simply nodded at him. He nodded back, his eyes full of a silent understanding that only a lifetime of friendship can build. He didn't ask questions. He knew. I went to the small bookshelf in the corner, a piece of furniture I had helped him assemble years ago. Behind a row of dusty history books was a small gray metal box. It was heavy both in weight and in the secrets it held. I brought it to the table and opened it. The hinges creaked softly. Inside, resting on a bed of yellowed legal documents, was a single business card. It was thick, creamy colored paper, the name Evelyn Reed, Attorney at Law, embossed in elegant, no-nonsense lettering. The card was 25 years old, but I had kept it safe, knowing that one day it would be the most important thing I owned. I pulled out my simple flip phone, a device Kevin and Chantel constantly made fun of, and carefully dialed the number. I expected a voicemail. It was nearly midnight, but she answered on the second ring, her voice as crisp and clear as I remembered it from a quarter-century ago. Evelyn Reed. She said it not as a question, but as a statement of fact. Ms. Reed. I began, my own voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside me. This is Caleb Thompson. There was a brief pause on the other end. A silence not of confusion, but of recognition. Caleb, she said, her tone softening just a fraction, but still retaining its professional edge. I was wondering when you might call. Is everything all right? I looked around Isaiah's warm, humble apartment. I thought of the cold, empty mansion my home had become. No, I said simply. It's time. Another pause, longer this time. I could almost hear the gears turning in her brilliant legal mind, pulling up the decades-old files, preparing the strategy we had laid out so long ago. The contingency plan is in place, she finally said. I will need your signature on a few documents tomorrow. Are you absolutely certain about this, Caleb? Once we set this in motion, the consequences will be irreversible. I thought of Ruby's face, of her dying wish. I thought of my daughter's face, twisted in rage, screaming at me to get out of the home her mother's sacrifice had paid for. I've never been more certain in my life, I said. I understand. My office, 10 a.m. The line went dead. I closed the phone and placed it on the table. A heavy sigh escaped my lips, the first real sign of the weight I was carrying. Isaiah got up from his chair and walked to a small cabinet. He pulled out 2 glasses and a bottle of whiskey, the good stuff he saved for special occasions. He poured 2 fingers in each glass and pushed one towards me. He didn't say a word, just sat down opposite me. I took a slow sip. The liquor burned a welcome trail down my throat, a fire that felt like life in the midst of all the coldness. He let the silence hang for a minute before he finally spoke, his voice a low rumble. So she finally did it, huh? Pushed the button. I didn't need to ask who she was. I just nodded, staring into the amber liquid in my glass. I held out as long as I could, Izzy, I said, my voice hoarse. For Ruby. I kept my promise to her. I protected Chantel from the truth. But I think I protected her too much. I built the walls so high she forgot what they were built on. Isaiah took a long drink from his glass. You can't protect a child from their own character, Caleb. You gave her everything. It's not your fault she decided it wasn't enough. He leaned forward, his weathered face serious. You know what comes next, right? This isn't just about a house anymore. You're about to start an engine that can't be stopped. It's going to get ugly. I looked up from my glass and met my friend's worried gaze. A grim smile touched my lips for the first time that night. I know, I said. I spent 40 years on an assembly line, Isaiah. I know exactly what happens when you start an engine. And this one is long overdue. My conversation with Isaiah hung in the air, heavy as the silence that followed. He was right. This would get ugly. But they had left me no choice. My hand went to my back pocket and pulled out my old leather wallet, softened and worn by decades of use. I didn't need to open the metal box again to remember why I was doing this. I carried the reason with me every single day. Tucked behind my driver's license was a small, creased photograph of Ruby. It was taken on a summer day at Belle Isle, long before Chantel was born. Her smile was wide and genuine, her eyes sparkling with a light that could outshine the sun. She looked so full of life, so vibrant. It was hard to believe that same light had been extinguished by a faulty piece of machinery on a Tuesday afternoon. I stared at her face, tracing the outline of her smile with my thumb. The sounds of Isaiah's apartment faded away. The scent of whiskey was replaced by the cold antiseptic smell of a hospital waiting room. The warmth of the room chilled, and I was no longer a 67-year-old man in my friend's apartment. I was a broken 42-year-old man sitting across from a sharp-eyed young lawyer about to make a decision that would define the rest of my life. The world around me dissolved and reformed. I was 42 again, my hands feeling too big and clumsy as they rested on the polished mahogany of a conference table. The air in the lawyer's office was heavy with the scent of old leather, and money a world away from the smell of oil and steel that clung to my work clothes. I felt like an imposter, a grieving ghost haunting a place I didn't belong. Across the table sat Evelyn Reed, a younger version of the woman I had just spoken to, but with the same sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through you. She had been recommended by the union, a bulldog of a lawyer, they said, someone who didn't back down from the big corporations. She had just spent a year fighting for Ruby and for me, and she had won. But it felt like the most hollow victory of my life. In front of her was a thick file, and on top of it a check. The number of zeros on it made my head spin. It was a sum of money so vast it seemed unreal, like something from a movie. It was the price the company had paid for a faulty safety rail for a few cut corners. It was the price they put on my wife's life. "This is a wrongful death settlement," Caleb Ms. Reed said, her voice gentle but firm, cutting through my fog of grief. "It's not a lottery ticket, it's a responsibility. The court has awarded you a significant sum, and now we have to make sure it does what it's supposed to do, honor Ruby's memory and secure Chantel's future." I just nodded, unable to speak. The money felt dirty, cursed. I wanted to tear the check to pieces. Ms. Reed seemed to read my mind. "I know this is hard," she continued, pushing a glass of water towards me. "But we need to think logically. You have a 10-year-old daughter. This money can give her opportunities neither you nor Ruby ever had. College, a safe home, a start in life. But it can also be a burden, a weight, and if we are not smart about it, it can be a danger." She leaned forward, her expression serious. "A lump sum of money like this sitting in a bank account is vulnerable. It can be lost to bad investments, to future creditors, or, forgive me for being blunt, to a teenager who suddenly comes into a fortune she isn't prepared to handle. We need to protect this money. More importantly, we need to protect Chantel from it." That got my attention. Protecting Chantel was the only thing that mattered now. It was the last promise I had made to Ruby. "What do you mean?" I finally managed to say, my voice raspy. "I mean, we build a fortress," she said, a spark of energy in her eyes. "A legal fortress. It's called an irrevocable living trust. Think of it like a safety deposit box that no one can open but you. We will create a new legal entity. Let's call it the Ruby Thompson Memorial Trust. This trust is what will officially receive the settlement money." She slid a fresh piece of paper between us and began to sketch it out. "First, the trust buys a home. A good solid house in a safe neighborhood. The deed to that house will be in the trust's name, not yours. Second, you, Caleb, are named the sole trustee. That means you have absolute and total control over everything the trust owns for the rest of your life. You manage the property, you make the decisions. You are the guardian of Ruby's legacy." She drew a circle and labeled it Trust. Inside she wrote House. Then she drew a line to a box labeled Caleb, Trustee. "And Chantel?" I asked. She drew another line from the trust, pointing away. "Chantel is the beneficiary," Ms. Reed explained. "That means she inherits everything the trust owns automatically upon your passing. It becomes hers, free and clear. But until that day, she has no legal control. She cannot demand the house be sold. She cannot use it as collateral for a loan. No future husband, no creditor. No one can touch it. We are protecting her future from youthful mistakes and from anyone who might try to take advantage of her. The key word, Caleb, is irrevocable. Once we do this, it cannot be undone, not even by you. It is a permanent shield." I looked at the simple diagram on the paper. A fortress. A shield. Those were words I understood. For the first time since the accident, a path forward started to appear through the haze. This wasn't about the money. It was about fulfilling a duty. It was about turning this tragedy into a foundation of safety for my little girl, a foundation built in her mother's name. It was a way to let Ruby continue to protect her even after she was gone. "She won't know where the money came from?" I asked quietly. Ms. Reed's expression softened. "That's up to you. But my advice? Let her believe you bought the house with your savings. Let her grow up without the shadow of this tragedy hanging over her. Let her just be a kid." I thought of my bright, happy daughter who still didn't fully understand that her mother was never coming home. Protecting her from that shadow was the greatest gift I could give her. I picked up the pen. It felt impossibly heavy in my hand. "Okay," I said, my voice finding a strength I didn't know it had. "Let's build the fortress." The memory of signing those papers blurred, and the lawyer's office dissolved into a different, more painful room. A room that smelled of antiseptic and fear. The steady, rhythmic beep of a heart monitor was the only sound, a cruel clock ticking away the final moments I had with my Ruby. She lay in the hospital bed, a shadow of the vibrant woman I had shared my life with. The accident had taken so much, leaving her frail, her breath coming in shallow wisps. But her eyes, when she opened them, were still the same. They were still full of a fierce, unwavering love, a love that was now focused entirely on the future of our little girl. I sat by her side, holding her hand, its warmth fading against my own calloused palm. The lawyers had already been there explaining the company's settlement offer. We both knew the money was coming. It felt like blood money, a grotesque payment for the life they had stolen. Ruby knew I was struggling with it, that I saw it as a curse. She squeezed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Caleb." She whispered, her voice a fragile thread of sound. "Listen to me, baby." I leaned in closer, my heart aching with a pain so intense I could barely breathe. "That money," she continued, each word an effort. "It's not for us. It's for her. It's for Chantel." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "I want you to promise me something," she said, her eyes locking onto mine, demanding my full attention. "You have to promise me. Don't tell her where it came from. Don't ever let her know it was because of this." I started to object, to say that Chantel had a right to know, but Ruby shushed me with a gentle pressure on my hand. "No, Caleb, please. I don't want our daughter growing up in the shadow of this ugliness. I don't want her to see herself as the girl whose mother died in an accident. I don't want her life to be defined by a tragedy." Tears streamed down my face, falling onto our joined hands. I finally understood what she was afraid of. It wasn't just about the sadness, it was about the potential poison of the money itself. "I don't want her to think this money is some kind of prize for me being gone," Ruby whispered, her voice cracking. "I want her to think it's from us, from a lifetime of your hard work and our careful saving. I want her to see it as a foundation built from her parents' love, not a payment for her mother's death. Let her be proud of it. Let her be proud of you, of the father who provided for her. That's the legacy I want, not the memory of a lawsuit. She was giving me a gift even then. She was protecting me, protecting our family's honor. She was thinking not of herself, but of how our daughter would see her father for the rest of his life. She was making sure Chantel's future would be built on a story of strength and hard work, not on one of pain and loss." I leaned down and kissed her forehead, my tears mingling with the cold sweat on her skin. "I promise, Ruby," I choked out the words, feeling like a sacred vow. "I promise. She'll never know. I'll protect her." A small, peaceful smile touched her lips. Her eyes fluttered closed, not in sleep, but in release. She knew her daughter was safe, and I knew what I had to do. The plan wasn't just a legal strategy from Ms. Reed, it was my wife's last will and testament. The memory of my promise to Ruby was so vivid, so powerful, it solidified everything. When my mind returned to the lawyer's office, the fog of grief had lifted, replaced by a singular, unshakable purpose. Ms. Reed slid the thick stack of documents across the polished table towards me. They were filled with dense legal language. I didn't fully understand words like settler, fiduciary duty, and principal residence. But I understood the meaning behind them. They were the bricks and the mortar for the fortress I was about to build around my daughter. They were the shield that would honor my wife's final wish. I picked up the heavy fountain pen she offered me. My hand, a hand accustomed to the grit of a factory and the weight of heavy tools, was perfectly steady. I looked at the signature line where my name, Caleb Thompson, was waiting. This signature would be different from any other I had made in my life. It was more than a name on a piece of paper. It was a silent vow. It was the beginning of a 25-year-long secret. With a firm, deliberate stroke, I signed my name, sealing the pact I had made with my dying wife. The sharp scent of the pen's ink faded, and the sounds of Isaiah's apartment slowly returned to my ears. The low hum of the refrigerator, the distant rumble of a truck on the street outside. The memory receded, leaving behind not the raw pain of fresh grief, but the hard, cold certainty of my purpose. My mission was as clear to me now as it had been on the day I signed those papers. I had spent a quarter of a century upholding my end of the bargain. I had given my daughter a life free from the shadow of tragedy built on a lie told out of the deepest love. And she had repaid that love with scorn and contempt. She had tried to throw me out of the very fortress I had built to protect her. I looked down at the photograph of Ruby one last time, her smiling face a beacon of strength. I carefully, gently tucked the photo back into its place in my wallet and slid it into my back pocket. The act felt final. I was no longer a man mourning his past. The grief was still there, a hot coal deep inside me, but now it was fuel. It powered a cold, patient, and methodical resolve. The sad, grieving husband was gone. The hurt, rejected father was gone. All that was left was the trustee, and I had a sacred duty to perform. I spent the next few days at Isaiah's, sleeping on his pull-out sofa. I didn't have to guess what was happening at my house. I could picture it perfectly. The silence I left behind would have been filled not with remorse, but with the pop of a champagne cork. In my mind's eye, I see them. My daughter Chantel and her husband Kevin standing in the middle of the living room, crystal flutes in their hands, toasting to their newfound freedom. The air would feel lighter to them, cleansed of the heavy presence of an old man's memories. They wouldn't see it as a tragedy, a family torn apart. They would see it as a victory. I can almost hear Chantel's sigh of relief. It's done, she'd say, a triumphant smile on her face. We can finally breathe. We can finally move forward. Kevin would put his arm around her, his expression a mixture of pride and smug satisfaction. You were strong, honey, he'd tell her. You did what had to be done. He was holding us back. You can't build a future when you're shackled to the past. To them, I wasn't a father. I was a shackle. I wasn't a source of love and support, but a burden that had finally been cast off. They would drink to that. They would celebrate the severing of the final tie to a life of honest work, a life they deemed embarrassing. They'd wander through the quiet rooms, their voices echoing in the space I had once filled, planning their glorious, unburdened future. They were celebrating their victory on ground they thought they had conquered completely, unaware that it was and always had been a minefield. I can see Kevin leading her to the new marble island in the kitchen, his eyes gleaming with a greedy, ambitious light. He'd pull out his tablet, his fingers swiping across the screen, bringing up spreadsheets and real estate listings. Now that the obstacle is gone, he'd begin choosing his words with a lawyerly sort of slime. We can finally activate the asset. Chantel would lean in, her eyes wide with excitement. To her, Kevin was a financial genius, a visionary. To me, he was a cheap hustler who'd married into a life he could never have earned. The housing market in this neighborhood is on fire, he'd explain, his voice full of self-importance. This house, with a few cosmetic upgrades, is worth at least $900,000, easily. He wouldn't mention that its value was built on decades of a community's hard work, on the stability that families like mine had created. To him, it was just a number on a screen. I've already spoken to our guy at the bank, he'd boast. We can do a cash-out refinance. We'll borrow against the equity, pull out around $400,000 in cash, and the monthly payments will be manageable. Chantel would be mesmerized, the number hanging in the air like a magic spell. $400,000. What will we do with it? She'd ask, her voice a breathless whisper. That's the beautiful part, Kevin would say, leaning back with the air of a king. There's a commercial property downtown, an old warehouse. The city is rezoning the whole district. I've got an inside track. We buy it with the cash, flip it in 18 months. And we don't just double our money, honey. We triple it. We're not talking about a comfortable life anymore. We're talking about real wealth. The kind of wealth that makes people forget you ever had a factory worker for a father. That was the true prize for them. Not just the money, but the erasure. He looked at her, his smile predatory. Your father was sitting on a gold mine. He'd say, his voice dripping with contempt, and he was using it as a footstool. He had no vision, but we do. Chantel's face would be illuminated by the glow of the tablet screen, her reflection staring back at a future she desperately craved. The last remnants of guilt or doubt would vanish, replaced by a cold, hard ambition that mirrored her husband's. We have to do it, Kevin, she'd say, her voice firm. We have to. Then her gaze would drift around the room, no longer seeing the walls that had sheltered her as a child, but seeing only the obstacles standing in the way of her grand future. But first, she'd declare a new unsettling energy in her voice. "We need to get rid of all this, stuff." She'd wave her hand around the room, a gesture of sweeping dismissal. "All of it." Kevin would raise an eyebrow, amused. "All of it." She'd nod, her eyes glinting. "That old armchair he loved, the one with the permanent dent in the cushion, it's going to the dump. The bookshelf he built firewood. And all those boxes in the attic. All of Mom's old things." The words would hang in the air, a final, shocking betrayal. She wasn't just throwing out old furniture. She was throwing out her mother, her recipe books, her sewing patterns, all those dusty photo albums. "It's clutter, Kevin. It's the past. We need a clean slate, a fresh start." There would be no sadness in her voice, only a ruthless efficiency. It was a purge, a symbolic annihilation of the two people who had given her everything. She was burning down her own history to build a palace on the ashes. I can see them so clearly, raising their glasses one last time. "To a fresh start," Kevin would say. To the future, she would reply, her voice ringing with conviction. They'd clink their glasses, the sound sharp and brittle in the quiet house, a house that was now just a property, an asset waiting to be stripped. They were toasting their bright future, standing on the foundation of the Ruby Thompson Memorial Trust, and they had absolutely no idea. My lawyer, Ms. Reed, didn't waste any time. The 10 a.m. meeting was short and to the point. I signed the necessary papers, and the first gear of the machine we had built 25 years ago began to turn. The first step was not an attack, but a quiet, methodical gathering of evidence. Ms. Reed knew that in a battle like this, you don't just need the law on your side. You need your opponent's own arrogance as your primary weapon. A week after I had walked out of my home, a man named Mr. Davies pulled up to the curb in a modest sedan. He was an independent property appraiser, a man Ms. Reed had used for years, known for his meticulous attention to detail and his unreadable poker face. He was the perfect person to walk into the lion's den. I was told that when Chantel answered the door, her face lit up with a triumphant smile. She and Kevin had been expecting someone, just not someone sent by me. They believed he was from their bank, the final step before the approval of their massive home equity loan. Kevin greeted him at the door with a firm, overly confident handshake, the kind of handshake a man gives when he thinks he owns the world. "Mr. Davies, I presume." "Right on time," Kevin said with a broad, smug grin. "Come on in. We're eager to get this show on the road." Chantel played the perfect hostess, offering him coffee, her voice a smooth, practiced melody of grace and success. They were performing, putting on a show of wealth and stability for the man they thought held the keys to their future. They had no idea he was there to document their downfall. They led him into the living room, their living room now, and began the tour completely oblivious that every word they were about to say was a nail in their own coffin. Mr. Davies was a quiet man. He walked through this house with a clipboard in one hand and a laser measuring tool in the other, his expression neutral, professional. This silence, as Ms. Reed had predicted, made them nervous. It made them want to talk, to fill the void, to impress him with the grandeur of their vision. And so they did. Kevin took the lead, striding through the rooms like a conquering general, pointing out all the flaws he intended to correct. "As you can see, the layout is incredibly dated," he announced, waving a dismissive hand at the wall separating the kitchen and living room. "We're tearing all of this down, creating a true open-concept space. It'll completely change the flow of the home." Mr. Davies just nodded and made a note. "The backyard is a total waste of prime real estate," Kevin continued as they stood by the back windows. "We're putting in a heated saltwater pool, a full outdoor kitchen, and a fire pit. It'll be an entertainer's paradise. That alone should add at least $100,000 to the property value," Chantel chimed in, her voice full of excitement. "And all of this dark, dreary wood has to go," she said, running a finger disdainfully over the solid oak banister I had spent a month sanding and staining by hand. "I want everything light, bright, and airy. Think Scandinavian minimalist. We want to host fundraisers here, you know. Events for Kevin's business partners. We have to elevate the property to match our lifestyle." They spoke of the house not as a home, but as a product to be rebranded. They detailed their plans for the master bathroom, a full gut job, with a steam shower and a soaking tub. They talked about replacing the perfectly good hardwood floors, refinishing the ceilings, and installing a new high-tech security system. Every word was a desecration of Ruby's memory, a dismissal of the life we had built. and Mr. Davies, bless his professional heart, wrote it all down. He noted their intention to make significant, irreversible structural changes. He documented their plans to acquire substantial debt against the property. They thought they were describing a dream home. In reality, they were giving Ms. Reed a signed confession of their intent to misuse the assets of a trust that they had no legal right to control. As the tour concluded back in the entryway, Mr. Davies paused, looking down at his notes as if reviewing his figures. This was the moment Ms. Reed had prepared him for. He looked up, his expression still perfectly neutral. "These are quite extensive renovations," he said, his tone casual. "You're planning to finance them through a home equity loan, I assume?" Kevin puffed out his chest, proud of his financial acumen. "That's the plan," he confirmed. "Leveraging the asset to increase its value. It's basic economics, really. A no-brainer." Mr. Davies made another small note. "I see," he said. Then he asked the most important question, the one that would seal their fate. "And just for my report, the title to the property is clear. You are the sole legal owners." Kevin let out a short, condescending laugh as if the question was the most ridiculous thing he had ever heard. "Absolutely," he said with unwavering confidence. 100%. The previous occupant, my father-in-law, is no longer in the picture. He's an old man, doesn't understand modern finance or real estate. The house is ours now, free and clear. We have full authority to make any and all changes as we see fit." Chantel nodded eagerly in agreement, adding the final damning touch. "It's for the best, really," she said, her voice filled with a fake, pitying tone. "He was just letting the place fall into disrepair. In a way, we're saving it." Mr. Davies looked from Kevin to Chantel, then made one last deliberate checkmark on his clipboard. "Thank you," he said, his voice flat. "That's all the information I need." He packed his tools, shook their hands, and left. I can see them now, closing the door behind him, turning to each other with triumphant, beaming smiles. They would have hugged, maybe even danced a little in the entryway. They thought they had just passed a crucial test. They thought the money was as good as theirs. They had no idea that the quiet, unassuming appraiser had just walked away with the keys to their destruction. The trap had been set, and now it had just snapped shut. Another week went by. A week of silence. At Isaiah's place, I fell into a quiet routine. We drank coffee, read the paper, and worked on fixing the engine of his old Chevy. I didn't call the house. I didn't need to. I knew with the certainty of a man who has set a clock and is waiting for the alarm to ring that the next move was not mine to make. Ms. Reed's machine was in motion, and it was perfectly on schedule. Back at the house, I can picture the scene as if I were there. It would have been late morning. Chantel and Kevin were likely in the kitchen drinking coffee at their cold marble island, excitedly discussing renovation plans. They would have been on top of the world, convinced that their loan was just days away from approval. They were probably arguing playfully about the color of the new kitchen cabinets or the type of tile for the pool. Then the doorbell would have rung. It wouldn't be a regular mailman, but a courier holding a single, stiff, cream-colored envelope. Kevin, ever the man in charge, would have taken it, a smug smile on his face. He'd feel the weight of it, see the official-looking return address of a downtown law firm, and assume it was their bank's legal department sending over the final loan documents. "This is it, babe," he would have announced, waving the envelope like a trophy. "I told you my guy would push it through. We'll be swimming in cash by next Friday." Chantel would have clapped her hands in delight, her mind already spending the money. Their dream was so close they could taste it. That envelope wasn't just paper. It was their validation, the key to the future they believed they were entitled to. Kevin, with a theatrical flourish, would have slid his finger under the flap and pulled out the single heavy sheet of paper inside. The first sign of trouble would have been the letterhead. It wasn't from Sterling Bank. It was from Reed Harding and Associates, a name that meant nothing to them. He'd have a flicker of confusion, but his arrogance would have quickly dismissed it. He'd clear his throat and begin to read aloud, his confident tone slowly faltering as he processed the first few lines. I can see the color draining from his face, his smug smile collapsing into a slack-jawed expression of disbelief. The letter wouldn't begin with "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Sterling." It would begin with the cold, impersonal address to Mr. Kevin Sterling and Ms. Chantel Thompson, current unauthorized occupants of the property located at 123 Maple Drive. Unauthorized occupants. The words would hang in the air, a stunning, incomprehensible insult. "What the hell is this?" Chantel would ask, her voice sharp with annoyance, snatching the letter from his hand. Her eyes would scan the page, and her confusion would quickly turn to horrified recognition at the next line. "This correspondence serves as formal notice from Reed Harding and Associates legal counsel for our client." And here was the blow, the single phrase that would shatter their entire world. The Ruby Thompson Memorial Trust. I can picture my daughter's face, the name of her own mother linked to a word she didn't understand. Ruby Thompson. Trust, she'd stammer, looking at Kevin for an explanation he didn't have. "What is that? This has to be some kind of sick joke." But the letter continued, each word a hammer blow against the foundation of their fantasy. It stated in clear, unambiguous legal language that the Ruby Thompson Memorial Trust was, and had been for the past 25 years, the sole legal and registered owner of the property. It referred to their presence in the home as illegal occupation. It cited their recent application for a home equity loan as an attempt to fraudulently secure financing using a protected asset belonging to the trust, and it specifically mentioned the date of the appraiser's visit as evidence of their intent. Her hands would be trembling now, the thick paper shaking. The words swam before her eyes: illegal, fraudulent, cease and desist. The final paragraph was the kill shot, a perfectly crafted instrument of legal destruction. "You are hereby instructed to cease all activity on the property and vacate the premises within 7 calendar days of receipt of this notice. Should you fail to comply, the trust will immediately pursue all available legal remedies, including formal eviction proceedings and a civil action to recover damages." The letter would fall from her hand, fluttering down to the cold marble countertop. The dream was over. The future they had been toasting to just days before had evaporated, replaced by a cold, terrifying reality. They were not homeowners. They were not victorious heirs. They were unauthorized occupants, and they had 1 week to get out. The silence that followed the reading of the letter must have been deafening. The grand plans, the triumphant celebrations, all of it reduced to ash by a single sheet of cream-colored paper. Kevin, a man who built his entire identity on being in control, would have been the first to break. He was a small-time hustler who had played a big game and just realized the casino was owned by someone else. His first instinct would have been to seek reassurance from his own corner, to call his lawyer, a man named Barry, who handled his real estate closings. I can picture him, his hands trembling slightly as he fumbled with his phone, trying to maintain a shred of his usual bravado. "Barry, it's Kevin," he'd say, his voice tight. "Listen, we got a bizarre letter here. Some high-end law firm, Reed Harding and Associates, claiming the house isn't in our name. They're talking about some Ruby Thompson Memorial Trust. It's complete nonsense, right? Just some kind of scare tactic from the old man Barry from his strip mall office." Would have been dismissive at first. "Reed Harding? Can't say I've heard of them, Kev. Sounds like a bluff. The old guy is probably just trying to shake you down. Look, don't sweat it. I'll pull the official county property records online right now. We'll clear this up in 5 minutes. I'll call you right back." Those 5 minutes would have felt like an eternity. Chantel would be pacing the kitchen floor, her mind racing. Kevin would be trying to project calm, but the facade would be cracking. Then his phone would ring again. "Okay, Kevin," Barry's voice would say, but all the easy confidence would be gone, replaced by a stunned, serious tone. I'm looking at the digital records from the Wayne County Register of Deeds. I'm looking at the title history for 123 Maple Drive." Barry would pause, and in that pause, Kevin's entire future would hang in the balance. "Kevin, it's here, in black and white. The property was purchased 25 years ago by the Ruby Thompson Memorial Trust. The trust is the sole owner of record. It's ironclad, man. Your name isn't on the title. Chantel's name isn't on the title. It was never on the title." The phone would nearly slip from Kevin's grasp. His own lawyer had just confirmed it. This wasn't a trick. This was a checkmate. That's impossible. Chantel would have shrieked the moment Kevin relayed the news, her voice echoing in the silent, cavernous kitchen. "My father is not smart enough to do this. He's a factory worker, for God's sake. He doesn't know anything about trusts or lawyers." Her panic was curdling into furious, desperate denial. To her, this reality was so fundamentally wrong, so contrary to her view of the world, that it simply could not be true. Her father was simple. She was sophisticated. He was the past. She was the future. This was a violation of the natural order of things as she saw them. This is a trick, she'd insist, her eyes wild. He's bluffing. He's trying to manipulate us. She would snatch her phone from the counter, her thumbs flying across the screen, and dial my number. At Isaiah's, my old flip phone began to buzz on the kitchen table, the screen lighting up with her name. Isaiah looked at me. I looked at the phone. I didn't feel anger or even satisfaction. I just felt a quiet, grim finality. I reached over and pressed the silence button. The buzzing stopped. Her name vanished from the screen. A moment later, it lit up again. She was calling back. I silenced it again. She must have called a dozen times, each call growing more frantic, each one crashing against the wall of my silence. That silence was my weapon now. Her inability to reach me, to scream at me, to force a confrontation would be more maddening than any argument. She was trapped in a nightmare, and the one person who held the key was refusing to answer the door. When the calls finally stopped, the denial must have finally shattered, leaving only raw, undiluted fear in its wake. They would have looked at the letter again, which was no longer just a document, but a verdict. The cold legal phrases now had the weight of absolute truth, and their eyes would fixate on the one phrase that mattered most: vacate the premises within 7 calendar days, 1 week, 168 hours. The abstract threat had suddenly become a ticking clock. The world began to shrink, their grand future collapsing into a narrow, terrifying timeline. The $400,000 loan was gone. The commercial property flip was a fantasy. The dream of becoming truly wealthy had vanished. They were facing the stark, humiliating reality that they were about to be homeless. I can see them standing there in that pristine white kitchen, the room they had seen as the future hub of their social empire. Now it was just a box, and the walls were closing in. The cream-colored envelope sat on the marble countertop between them, a silent testament to a plan laid a quarter of a century ago, a time bomb that had finally reached zero. The day of the meeting, the 6th day of their 7-day notice, dawned gray and overcast, a fitting backdrop for the final act. We met in Ms. Reed's conference room. It was a place designed to communicate power and seriousness, with a long, polished mahogany table, leather chairs, and a panoramic view of the city that seemed to judge everyone in the room. Ms. Reed sat at the head of the table, the picture of calm, professional authority. She was dressed in a sharp, dark gray suit, a stack of neatly bound documents placed precisely in front of her. I sat to her right, wearing a simple button-down shirt and my best slacks. I felt a profound sense of peace. The storm inside me had passed. Across from us sat the wreckage. Kevin's expensive suit was wrinkled, his tie was loose, and his face was pale and unshaven. His usual arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a nervous, twitching energy. He couldn't sit still, his eyes darting from me to Ms. Reed to the documents on the table. But it was my daughter who was the most changed. Chantel looked hollowed out, her face puffy and stained with tears. All the fight, all the righteous anger had been drained out of her, leaving behind a brittle, desperate shell. The power in the room had shifted completely. They were no longer the aggressors. They were the accused, waiting for the verdict. Kevin, incapable of enduring the heavy silence, was the first to speak. He tried to muster some of his old bluster, but his voice cracked. "Look, I don't know what kind of stunt you're trying to pull here." He started gesturing vaguely at the papers. "But our lawyer says this is contestable. We'll sue you for harassment for emotional distress." Ms. Reed didn't even blink. She just looked at him, her expression unchanging until his empty threats withered and died in the air. His approach then shifted to desperate bargaining. "Okay, look," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. "What's the number? What do you want? We can set up a payment plan, a generous one. You'll get your money. You can't just throw my wife out of her childhood home. It's inhuman." That's when Chantel finally broke. The tears she had been holding back began to flow freely. She looked directly at me, her eyes pleading. "Dad," she whispered, her voice raw. "Please, Dad, don't do this. It's my home. We made a mistake. I was stressed. I wasn't thinking. We can fix this. Please, just talk to me." Her words were full of panic, full of self-pity for what she was about to lose. But I listened for the one thing that wasn't there: remorse. She was sorry she got caught. She wasn't sorry for what she had done. Ms. Reed decided the time for talk was over. She leaned forward, her presence commanding the room. "This is not a negotiation, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice cutting through the air like cold, clear glass. "This is a notification of legal reality." She slid the first bound document across the polished table. It landed in front of them with a soft, final thud. This, she said, is a certified copy of the Articles of Incorporation for the Ruby Thompson Memorial Trust filed with the state of Michigan 25 years ago. She slid a second document after it. This is the certified deed for the property at 123 Maple Drive, clearly showing the trust as the sole and undisputed owner since the date of purchase. Her movements were precise, economical, and utterly devastating. And this, she said, sliding a third, thinner document on top of the pile, is the sworn and notarized report from the independent appraiser, Mr. Davies. I draw your attention to page 4, paragraph 2. She paused, letting them absorb the moment. In it, you, Mr. Sterling, are quoted as stating that you are the sole legal owner of the property. You also state, and I quote, "We have full authority to make any and all changes as we see fit." She leaned back in her chair, her work almost done. This isn't a family squabble about who gets the house. This is a documented attempt by unauthorized occupants to fraudulently secure financing against an asset belonging to our client, the trust. The trust has no interest in your payment plan. It is only interested in securing its property. The eviction will proceed tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. as scheduled. A choked sob escaped Chantel's lips. Kevin just stared defeated. The legal case was closed, but the emotional one was still open, and it was my turn to speak. I looked at my daughter not with anger, but with a deep, weary sadness. "You were right about one thing, Chantel," I said, my voice quiet but filling the silent room. "I'm not smart enough to have come up with all this. This was never my plan." She looked up, a flicker of confusion in her tear-filled eyes. "You stand here and you talk about your home," I continued. "You cry about being thrown out. But in all these years, you never once asked about the foundation this home was built on. You were so ashamed of your factory worker father, so embarrassed by my calloused hands, that you never stopped to think about what those hands truly provided for you." I let the words hang in the air for a moment. It was time for the final terrible truth. This house, Chantel, your private school education, the brand new car you got on your 16th birthday, the money for your wedding. It didn't come from my factory wages. It came from the settlement. I watched the word land. I saw the incomprehension on her face. The wrongful death settlement, I clarified, my voice steady, despite the old pain that was rising in my chest. The money the automotive company paid because their faulty equipment, their negligence, killed your mother. The color drained from her face. The truth, the real truth, hit her with the force of a physical blow. Her entire life, her entire sense of self was being rewritten in that single horrifying moment. "I kept that secret for 25 years, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, "because your mother's last wish was to protect you from that ugliness. She didn't want you living in the shadow of a tragedy. She wanted you to have a life you could be proud of, a life you thought was built on love and hard work. That was her legacy. And you and your husband, you tried to sell it to build a swimming pool." I stood up. The meeting was over. The truth was finally out. And it was a far greater punishment than any eviction could ever be. I didn't stay to watch the full extent of the fallout. I didn't need to. The truth was a bomb, and its detonation in that sterile conference room was absolute. Kevin was broken. All the swagger, all the cheap confidence had been stripped away, leaving behind the small, terrified man he had always been. He just sat there silent and shrinking in his expensive suit, a ghost at his own funeral. But my eyes were on my daughter. The truth didn't make Chantel angry. It didn't make her scream. It simply erased her. I watched as 25 years of a carefully constructed reality crumbled to dust in her mind. Her entire life, every achievement she was proud of, every comfort she had taken for granted, was now tainted by the grotesque truth of its origin. Her shame of me, of my life's work, was now revealed as a profound disrespect to the mother she claimed to love. A single choked sob escaped her lips, a sound of such utter devastation it was barely human. She didn't look at me. She just stared at the polished table, her whole world collapsing inward. I had done what I had to do. I had fulfilled my promise. I stood up, pushed my chair in, and walked out of the room, leaving them to drown in the silence and the truth. The eviction took place the next morning at 9 a.m. sharp. There was no drama, no resistance. The fight had already been lost the day before in that conference room. The house, the asset, was secured. But I knew its purpose couldn't be to simply sit empty, a monument to a broken family. That would not have honored Ruby. So a few weeks later, Ms. Reed, acting on my instructions as the trustee, sent out a second letter. This one didn't go to Chantel and Kevin, but to community leaders, local charities, and the Union Hall. It was an announcement. It stated that the Ruby Thompson Memorial Trust, in accordance with its mission to honor the memory of its namesake, was repurposing the property at 123 Maple Drive. The house would not be sold. Instead, it would be renamed. It would be called Ruby's House. Its new purpose was to become a sanctuary, a fully funded transitional home for families who had lost a primary earner to a workplace accident. It would be a place where grieving families could stay free of charge for up to a year while they got back on their feet. It would offer grief counseling and financial planning services. The fortune that had begun with a tragedy would now be used to shield others from the harshest consequences of their own. It was no longer just a house. It had become a legacy. Several months have passed since that day. I'm standing in the backyard of Ruby's house. The air is filled with the smell of freshly cut grass and the sound of children's laughter. Where Kevin had planned to build his swimming pool, there is now a sprawling community garden bursting with tomatoes and zucchini. The house itself is alive again, not with the strained silence of a showroom, but with the warm, bustling energy of life. I come here most days. I'm not an owner or a landlord. I'm just Caleb, the resident handyman and grandfather figure. A young boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old, whose father was lost in a construction accident last spring, comes running up to me. "Is it ready, Mr. Thompson?" he asks, his eyes wide with excitement. I smile and show him the small wooden birdhouse we've been building together. My hands, the same calloused factory worker's hands my daughter was so ashamed of, are now teaching a new generation how to build something real, something that offers shelter. As I help him hang it on the branch of the old oak tree, I look up at the house. I feel a sense of peace that I haven't felt in years. I kept my promise to Ruby. I protected her legacy not by hoarding it, but by transforming it into an expression of her generous, loving spirit. The true foundation was never about the money or the property. It was about turning pain into purpose. And in this place, surrounded by the lives she is still touching, my wife's legacy is finally truly safe. This long, painful journey taught me a vital lesson. A true legacy isn't found in the value of a house or the size of a bank account, but in the values you honor. For years I watched my daughter grow ashamed of the life of honest work that provided for her, and I stayed silent. I learned that true strength isn't in endlessly avoiding conflict to keep a false peace, but in standing firm for what you believe in, even if it breaks your heart. A house is just wood and nails, but a home is built from love and respect. Sometimes you have to be willing to tear down the house to save the true legacy within. Has there ever been a time in your life when you had to make a difficult choice to protect your family or your values? Please share your story in the comments below.